Are you presenting today, Mark, on transportation?
Renee is.
Renee is. Okay. Well, I'm excited about this presentation. I mean, the school year is young, but I've dealt with a lot of transportation issues myself. So,
Yeah, it's very topical.
yeah.
We just had one this morning, actually.
Mm.
We're going to give it about 2 more minutes and then we'll get started. Hey, Renee.
Hi, sorry about that delay. My laptop decided it was time to update everything.
Oh, no worries. We were just going to get started with the introduction, but yeah, welcome.
Perfect. I'll be pulling up the PowerPoint while you do that.
Okay. All right. My name is Mark Weicker. Welcome to the Special Education Legal Clinic. We're getting started again after a couple months off. And for those of you who are new to the clinic, we're going to have a 1-hour workshop. And that workshop today is going to be led by Renee Stromsky, and it's going to be on transportation, school transportation for special education students. And again, for those of you new to the clinic, we have a workshop once a month, and that's typically on the third Mondays of the month. There are a couple exceptions to that in our new series, and our new series runs from September through August. So we have a full year of programming, and that's scheduled out, and it's available at the same place that you registered, which is lawyersforstudents.com/legal clinic. And I'll drop that in the chat too once Renee gets started here. And again, the whole series is scheduled. The Special Education Legal Clinic is a collaboration between Disability Rights Ohio and the Ohio Coalition for the Education of Children with Disabilities, and Abdenor Weicker, which is our law firm. And we've been doing this since 2020 with the same format, workshops. And then following the workshops, some of you have scheduled for individual guidance sessions, which we hold for 30 minutes on a separate private Zoom. And we have several people scheduled for individual guidance sessions at slots following the workshop. So 1 o'clock, 1:30, 2 o'clock, and 2:30. We have 4 slots in a couple different rooms that we use, where individuals meet with either an attorney or advocate or both, and work through any issues they may be having in special education. Today, like I mentioned, the workshop is on navigating transportation challenges in special education by Renee Stromsky. One other side note before we get started, we do record the workshops, and we'll put those online at the same link that you register. And we usually do that within 2 or 3 days of the workshop being held, so by Friday or so for sure. And all the old workshops that we've had over the last few years are available online as well. And one last note before I turn it over to Renee, closed captioning is available, and that's available to anyone individually just by clicking the CC button in the bottom of your Zoom window. And with that, I'll turn it over to Renee Stromsky for navigating transportation challenges.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you again, everyone, for your patience this morning. Can everyone see the screen okay? Are the words blurry or anything? Looks all good. Okay, perfect. So like Mark said, we're going to talk about navigating transportation challenges in special education. And again, I'm Renee Stromsky. So just a little overview of how we're going to talk about this today, because there's a lot of nuances and components to special transportation. So we're going to start off by going through some definitions and really talking about what is special education transportation and who qualifies for it. And then we'll get into the legal requirements of local school districts, what they're required to provide as far as transportation and to whom. And then I felt it was best to kind of go over some of the common transportation challenges in the form of questions that we receive from parents a lot, or just in the form of common questions. So you'll also hear a little bit of those at the end. So it might be helpful if you hold your questions until the end, because we do have a live Q&A and I might have one of your questions popping up on the screen. But if you do have something maybe related to one of the slides that I'm talking about, or just another question maybe that you don't know if it's going to, that I might talk about, feel free to raise your hand, or feel free to drop the question in the Q&A, and then Mark and Danielle can stop me. So like I said, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, if you do have a question, I see that somebody raised their hand. If you have a question, if you could drop that in the chat box or in the Q&A. So well, a question in particular, if it's about the topic, please do drop it in the Q&A. If we may hold it to the end, depending on the question, or we may try to answer it either live through Renee, or Danielle and I may answer the question if we know. But I see that somebody raised their hand. If you're able to drop that question either in the Q&A or chat box, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Mark.
Sure.
So we will first talk about the definition of special education transportation. And it really comes from, I wanted to take a step back through the regulations and really talk about where transportation services comes from. So of course, one of the big things that you should know if you have a student who is on an IEP is that they are entitled to a FAPE. That's why they have an IEP. And a FAPE is a free appropriate public education. And the IDEA, which is at 34 CFR, those references there. I'm quoting the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. A FAPE means special education and related services that are able to be provided in conformity with those IEPs. And so the definition of what a related service is specifically means, from the IDEA's definition, related services means transportation and other such developmental, corrective, and other supportive services that are required to assist a child with a disability to benefit from special education. And we'll talk about that meaning of where that term benefit comes into play. Under that related services definition, there's an even more distinct definition of transportation. And in the IDEA, transportation includes travel to and from schools and between schools, travel in and around school buildings, and specialized equipment like those special or adapted buses, lifts, or ramps, if they're required to provide special transportation for a child with disability. So that's where our definition of transportation comes from. And again, the part of that definition of transportation means that it has to be required, transportation as required to assist a child with a disability to benefit from special education. And again, I'll touch on that in just a second. So that being said, who qualifies for transportation as a related services? Most children with disabilities receive the same transportation services as non-disabled children, unless that child's IEP team determines that the child's disability or their unique needs require transportation as a related service. And that's in section, I should have looked at this right before. I should have double checked this. I believe it's section 8. If Danielle, you think that might be wrong, or someone can correct me, it's somewhere around section 8.
Section 8 is correct. Yeah.
Thank you. I was like, I should have looked this up beforehand. So that it would be those children whose special transportation is checked yes in that section 8. Pretty much the rule of thumb is that if a student with a disability is capable of using transportation in the same manner as their non-disabled peers, then they likely don't qualify for special transportation because they don't need any accommodations, they don't need any modifications to their busing services that would require them to have access to their programs that take place at school. But if it is required for a child to benefit from special education, if they need transportation services or some sort of specialized transportation in order to get to school and access their services that they're getting by the school, then transportation must be checked yes as a related service that's needed by the child. So some common examples of needs that require transportation as a related service. And again, what we're talking about today, anything I talk about today, it's going to be based on the individual need of a child. So you might see a list of things up here like mobility and orthopedic impairment. Just because your child has an orthopedic impairment doesn't necessarily mean that they have that they need specialized transportation. Again, it's going to be dependent on the unique needs of the child. But for example, starting with mobility and orthopedic impairments, this is probably one of the biggest ones and one of the most common ones people think about when they think of specialized transportation would be, children with physical disabilities. And again, whether that's a mobility impairment like cerebral palsy or muscular dystrophy or another orthopedic impairment. This is where children might require a wheelchair accessible vehicle, some other specialized transportation to meet whatever kind of equipment they use. Or there's also orthopedic impairments. Maybe a student has difficulty walking long distances or climbing the steps up to the bus, or just other physical challenges that prevent them from safely getting to school without assistance. Those would be examples of some types of needs that would need those accommodations checked yes and would qualify for transportation services. I put severe here. I guess, again, it depends. It's going to all depend on the child, but emotional or behavior disorders, we see this a lot. So a child that might be qualified under an emotional disturbance or just have other, behavioral issues that require accommodations to make sure that they can ride the bus safely, whether that's, a safety harness, whether that is having an aide on the bus with them to help with behavior. Those are some kind of needs. Sensory processing disorders. This is for children, for example, children with autism who have usually some sensory difficulties. Perhaps the regular school buses, of course, are a lot bigger than some of those other modes of transportation. It can be very loud on the bus. It's a lot of people, very unpredictable. Can be not really a great environment for students with sensory processing disorders. So that's another kind of example where we could see an accommodation for transportation being made. Medical fragility. This is, again, kind of similar to orthopedic impairment, similar to orthopedic impairments, but just things like students with complex medical needs, where they might require oxygen or feeding tubes, or require just constant medical supervision where, they're not able to walk to a bus stop safely themselves and might need curb to curb transport or door to door assistance. And I think I will get into some of those some examples of accommodations on the next slide. So I'll talk about that. I just wanted to talk about this part first. Visual impairments, again, a child who is blind or has low vision might need some specialized transportation to help them navigate safely to school. Again, whether that's curb to curb assistance, helping them get on the bus, or door to door assistance. And then children with cognitive disabilities may require transportation services as well if they're unable to, understand or follow directions to be able to, navigate the bus system safely. So, for example, bus stops probably aren't, if they're having to walk long or longer distances to a bus stop, perhaps door to door, curb to curb, an accommodation like that would be more appropriate. Okay, so this is where I talk about some of those accommodations, modifications, and equipment that can be utilized sometimes to see. Of course, this list that I give is non-exhaustive. Again, it's based on the child's individual and unique needs, but these are a list of common ones that we see, and also it's the list pulled directly from the Ohio Administrative Code, and their definition of transportation is actually a lot more encompassing and has a lot more definitions to it than the IDEA itself. So it's a little bit more helpful. And some of those provisions of the Ohio Administrative Code include, again, this one was from the IDEA too, but the specialized equipment like special or adapted vehicles, lifts or ramps. And then the rest of these, again, were in the Ohio Administrative Code, but fitting or retrofitting vehicles with specialized equipment like car seats, securement systems, safety vests, harnesses. Of course, employment of transportation aids is in the Ohio Administrative Code, but essentially, I mean, those aids can be used for a large variety of things, whether that's implementing the next provision, which is an alternative pickup or drop off location, such as the curb, the driveway, or front door of the children's home. So the employment of a transportation aid could be someone who's helping with that, who's meeting the child at the curb or at the front door of their home and helping them get on the bus. It could be an aide who is riding the bus with the child to make sure that they're staying in their seat safely, that they're acting appropriately. Or someone who's there even for a student maybe with those that medical fragility that I spoke about earlier, who needs to just be there to monitor the child to make sure that they're okay during that bus time. That could be, transportation aids can be used for a variety of sources. And then the last one that the Ohio Administrative Code says is other travel that may be arranged by the school district with no reimbursement from the state. So it's really just saying, it's really there to encompass, whatever the child needs to get to school and provided to the child without cost to the parent, can be accommodated, or should be accommodated, I should say. So that being said, we've got our children who've got our unique needs. We've got some examples of some accommodations and modifications. Let's talk about what the school districts have to provide back to our students. I organized this, and let me take a sip of water. I organized this based on what type of school the child is enrolled in. It's also going to be based on whether it's in their IEP. So local school districts, a public school district is what we're going to start with. If your child is enrolled in a public school district and they have an IEP and transportation is listed as a related service, then the public school district is required to transport the student. If the student does not have transportation as a related service checked on their IEP, but they're giving transportation to everybody else in the district, then the district certainly has to accommodate your child as well. They can't just say because your child has a disability, we aren't going to transport them. But if your school district is one of the ones that, let's say, doesn't bus to all their students, doesn't provide busing to all their students, and your student doesn't qualify for transportation on their IEP, then the district would not be required to transport them to school. As far as community schools, the Ohio Administrative Code says that a community, and this is community or charter school, a community school governing board shall provide or arrange transportation free of any charge for any disabled student enrolled in the school if the student's IEP specifies transportation. So essentially, when you enroll in a charter school or a community school or a charter school, they still are responsible for providing your child with a FAPE, because they are still community schools are still publicly funded. They're required to follow those federal regulations, and part of FAPE, as we saw earlier, was related services, including transportation. So the Ohio Administrative Code actually requires the community schools to provide that transportation or arrange for those students with IEPs to get to the school, and to pay for that transportation. And this is regardless of age or grade and regardless of location as well. Non-public schools are where it gets a little bit trickier. The student school district of residence is the one that is responsible for busing to non-public schools. The non-public schools are not required to provide transportation. So that being said, for non-public schools, the school district of residence is required to provide transportation as a related service for all children with disabilities living in the school district who are enrolled in a non-public school if the school district has the child's IEP. So that part of the Ohio Revised Code is really great. It says, yeah, the school district has to provide transportation to students with IEPs who attend non-public schools that live in their school district. And it actually is regardless, according to the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce, that actually is regardless of the age or the grade of the child, or that is regardless of whether the child lives less than 2 miles from that school or even over 30 minutes from that school, says Ohio Department of Education. However, a district still is allowed to declare a student impractical to transport, even if they have an IEP, even if they have an IEP, and even if that IEP has transportation listed as a related service, they still can declare a student impractical to transport, which is a problem that we're seeing more often, unfortunately, and that's going to be one of the common transportation questions that I talk about and that I address and get into how you can, what that means and how you can address that when you hear that from your public school district.
Renee, do you want to
yes.
pause and answer some questions?
Yeah, sure. That'd be great.
Okay. Oh, Mark was answering for them. Perfect. Well, there was some clarification on transporting a child out of the district if they attend a district not at their home school.
Okay.
I think that you kind of addressed that a bit, but I don't know if you want to speak more on transportation outside of the district. If that student has an IEP.
Sure. So if they are enrolled in a community school outside the school district, the community school is still required to provide that student with, and it's listed as, it's checked yes as they require special education in their IEP. Then the community district would be the ones that are required to figure out how to transport them there without cost to the parent. If they're enrolled in a non-public school, the school by law is supposed to provide them with transportation to the non-public school, regardless of the location or the age or the grade of the child. But if that child, but the school still can't, like, it's the law's kind of confusing because it says that they have to do this, but then it says, oh, but they can declare it impractical if it's not practical to do so. So it's a little confusing. And we're seeing a lot of pushback on school districts right now, declaring a lot of those routes impractical. And I can get into how you can address that and how you can kind of fight back on that in a couple slides. But
Okay.
hopefully that kind of answers that question a little bit.
And then
Yeah,
second one, oh, so you go, Mark.
Oh, I was just going to add to Renee, you may be getting there, so sorry if I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but yeah, so, and I appreciate how you're organizing this because it can be a little confusing. There are certain scenarios if the box is checked, if you have transportation as a service. And I think you've outlined those pretty well. And if let's say the box is not checked, school districts, your local school district of residence, your public school district does have an obligation to transport the child. You got to look at two things. So long as the school district in which you're attending, so this could be in this case, let's say a non-public or a private school, same thing, is within 30 minutes, and then and the school district provides transportation to the same age peers in their district. So if they provide transportation for 8th graders, you have an 8th grader attending a private school, and that private school is within 30 minutes of the school that they would have been assigned in the public school district of residence, then that school should transport you. Except that you've talked about the exception already. Lots of schools, public schools are saying transportation is impractical, but then parents have a right then to challenge that decision outcome through mediation and then a hearing process. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm sorry if I jumped ahead. I just wanted to make sure
No.
because there are a lot of questions about that already. I just want to make
Oh,
sure.
okay. Yeah, that one's definitely, we are going to jump to that one. And I guess
Okay.
one thing that you said that I did want to highlight is the difference between a student with an IEP that has transportation checked as a related service would be is technically still entitled to transportation, even if they're going to a non-public school more than 30 minutes away, according to ODE, Whereas if the student is just a student with an IEP that doesn't have that check marked, they would be treated similar to a non-disabled child, and they would be subject to that 30-minute requirement. But there was, yeah, I was gonna say on the ODE website, it actually did say it didn't matter about that 30-minute requirement if they did have it checked as a transportation as a related
Right.
service.
Yeah, thank you.
But yes, I'm gonna get into that hearing part. I think I have a couple more questions before I hit that one. I can jump ahead to it now if you think that might be beneficial, or I can.
Are you
You're on.
looking at the questions right now, Renee?
Oh, no, I can't see the
Okay, okay.
Q&A. I just
So-
meant I'm about to go through some questions, so I didn't know if it'd
Oh,
be
I
helpful
see what
if
you're
I
saying.
jumped
Sorry.
ahead to the slide where I'm talking about that, or if I should just keep going.
No, I'd say keep going on your track, and then we'll try to answer some of these and then
Okay.
hold any other ones that we haven't answered.
Yes, I was gonna say, we will touch on that in practicality in that non-public school transportation in just a second. So hold questions on that for a second, and then I will address anything after that that I don't answer. So this one I kind of addressed before, but it's a common question that we get. Are all children with disabilities entitled to transportation? The answer is no. Not all children with disabilities will require transportation. Like I said before, if that student with a disability is capable of using transportation in the same manner as their non-disabled peers, then the specialized transportation isn't required. However, if you do disagree with the IEP's team's decision to not include transportation as a related service, let's say you believe that your child does need specialized transportation, they do need one of these accommodations or modifications or equipment, you do have the right to file a state or due process complaint. I would stick more with the state complaint with the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce, as it would be, you would be arguing that if you believe they qualify for transportation, you believe that that transportation is necessary for them to receive a FAPE. So you're having a claim that your child's not able to receive a FAPE without that transportation. And that's where that complaint can be made with the Department of Education. Can my child be denied, another question, can my child be denied the opportunity to attend field trips if their disability requires those special transportation requirements? The answer is no. According to the IDEA, a school district must take steps to provide non-academic and extracurricular services and activities, which includes field trips, in the manner necessary to afford children with disabilities an equal opportunity for participation in those services. This is both something I didn't necessarily touch on. I know we're talking a lot about IEPs and whether that's checked as, whether the box is checked as transportation as a related service, but for students that are on a Section 504 plan, let's say, for Section 504 plan that have accommodations for buses as well, they don't need an IEP for whatever reason, but they do require, specialized transportation. Maybe they do require a wheelchair lift to get on the bus or something. Those students as well, if they are denied the opportunity to attend field trips for that same reason, you can also file a complaint with the US Department of Education rather than the Ohio Department of Education, because that still is discrimination. Discrimination on the basis of disability. You're saying this student, because of their disability, because of the accommodations they require, we're not taking them on this field trip with all the other kids. Nope, that's not, that's discrimination. And they need to, that's something you can file a complaint with, again, Department of Education, whether that's state or federal. This is a good one that we see a lot. My first answer as I'm reading it isn't super helpful, but the question we get a lot is, can the school suspend or exclude my child from the bus if they have an IEP? The answer is maybe, or maybe the better answer is it depends. I'm going to skip over the second bullet and kind of go down to the third bullet first, because I think it helps explain it better. If transportation is included on your child's IEP as a related service, that box is checked yes. The school is saying that your child needs this specialized transportation in order to access their education. So if your child is suspended from the bus and has that as a related service, This bus suspension is considered actually considered a school suspension, because even if, let's say, parent is still able to transport the child to school during those 10 days, or let me back up. Even this, I'll back up. The school can suspend a child for up to 10 days on the bus. And if it's more than 10 days, they have to have a manifestation determination review to determine if the behavior that led to the suspension was a manifestation of the child's disability. If they do, and so if they do that suspension for more than 10 days, they're required to do the MDR. It's essentially, you're saying that since the school has checked the box, yes, that it's required to provide a FAPE, and you're saying that the child's not entitled to the transportation that gives them access to the services, then you are technically taking away the child's access from that services. So they will consider it a suspension from school and a change of placement for 10 days, even if the school even if they still are able to get to school, and it does warrant a manifestation determination review. However, if transportation is not checked as a related service on the IEP, then the student can be treated like any other student without a disability and can be suspended or excluded from the bus for as many days as the school determines. But what I will say is that at that point, if the child already has an IEP and issues on the bus, they're having these behaviors, I would want the IEP team really should come together at that point to see if the behaviors on the bus are similar to the behaviors in the classroom, and see if the IEP can address those behaviors that are on the bus. And in that case, then really the school district and the IEP team should come together and determine that perhaps transportation should be a related service at that point. Perhaps the student has similar behaviors that they're experiencing in school. And it's necessary to provide them with those specialized transportation services. But for example, perhaps the child is on an IEP for an orthopedic impairment, but they're just having really negative behaviors on the bus, and that's not something the IEP team believes is related to their disability at all. Then again, they can be denied transportation just like any other student. It's really confusing. There might be some questions on that, and I can come back to that. This is another one we get a lot. Is there a limit to the amount of time that my child can spend on the bus? No, and what I'll say is, to start, no, there's no law in Ohio that says a child can only be on a school bus for 2 hours. Really, or 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever it is. There's no law that says there's only a certain time limit a child can be on a bus. There is a law that says that a child cannot be dropped off to school more than 30 minutes late, or picked up more than 30 minutes after school. And that's for either 5 consecutive school days or for more than 10 school days in a year. Otherwise, there's no specific length of time. However, if we're talking about transportation for kids with disabilities, the transportation should be provided to students with disabilities in a non-discriminatory manner, which means that the students with disabilities should be transferred equally or equitably to the non-disabled students. So if we have non-disabled students, let's say, that they're all getting home in 30 minutes, and for whatever reason, your child unreasonably is getting home after 2 hours. Well, then since all the kids without disabilities, they're only spending 30 minutes on the bus, but your child with a disability has to spend 2 hours. And let's say that it doesn't have to do with, specialized transportation or anything. They're just, having trouble picking them up, or staffing issues or something, and they're leaving your child to, if they're treating them that way, then in that case, then it would be discrimination under Section 504, and you could file a complaint with the Department of Education Office for Civil Rights. You also may, it'd be kind of tough, but in some cases, you also might be able to submit a state complaint to the Ohio Department of Education in this case. If you can say that if you can argue that the longer bus ride is interfering with the child's FAPE. So maybe perhaps the bus has, like, if the bus has to pick the child up so early that they're too tired during the day to actually retain information and make progress on their goals, well, then that's, you know, impacting their ability to have a FAPE, so that you could make a claim for that. But otherwise, there's really no limit. It's just making sure that they're treated in a non-discriminatory manner. All right, here's the big one. My school district declared transportation to a non-public school for my child impractical. What does this mean? So districts, as we've talked about, they do have the right to declare transportation impractical for a student to a non-public school, and that's both with IEPs and without IEPs, based on consideration of all 6 of the statutory factors in Ohio Revised Code 332702. The 6 factors that a school must consider, and they have to consider all of them. One is the time and distance required to provide the transportation. 2 is the number of students requesting to be transported to the same or nearby schools. 3 is the cost of providing transportation in terms of equipment, maintenance, personnel, and administration. And I just want to put a star next to that for a quick second. Number 4 is whether similar or equivalent service is provided to other students eligible for transportation, both within and outside this district. Maybe put a little asterisk there. Whether and to what extent the additional transportation service would unavoidably disrupt current transportation schedules. And 6, whether other reimbursable types of transportation are available. So the school district does, and I think a lot of families don't realize this, but the school district is supposed to consider other reimbursable types of transportation as well and see if things are out there. So even if they're saying, hey, school bus drivers aren't, we have a shortage of school bus drivers, or we don't have enough school buses, whatever it is, they do have to consider whether there are other reimbursable types of transportation available, like a private car or whatever. But jumping back to number 3 and number 4, it doesn't say this necessarily in the statute, but when we're talking about consideration of the cost of providing transportation in terms of equipment, maintenance, personnel, and administration, and the same as to whether similar equivalent services provided to other students, we would also want to make sure that numbers 3 and 4 are applied in a non-discriminatory manner. So of course, the cost of providing transportation in terms of equipment to a child who maybe utilizes a wheelchair lift or needs that specialized bus is going to cost a lot more than a child without a disability who's maybe requesting these services. And really, the school district can't they can't discriminate at all in their public institution. So I don't think they would be able to say, okay, the cost of providing transportation in terms of equipment just because of your disability is impractical. So we're going to, again, declare it impractical and give you payment in lieu. That would be discrimination. And that's something, again, you would be able to go to the next slide. So because your school district declared your transportation impractical, what rights do you have? So that being said, if a school district determines that providing transportation is impractical for your student, the district has to notify you in writing, along with a specific offer, all of this in writing, along with a specific offer for a payment in lieu of transportation and an opportunity to reject the payment in lieu and pursue mediation procedures through the Department of Education. If mediation fails to resolve this dispute, then, and I keep going back and forth between DEW and ODE, I'm sorry. I know they're kind of switching over what they're calling. I don't know if we're kind of going back and forth between the acronyms they're using, but ODE, DEW are both the Ohio Department of Education. So I apologize for that. But if mediation fails to resolve the dispute, then the department will conduct a formal appeal hearing. And the important thing to note is that once a parent initiates those mediation procedures, the district is obligated to provide transportation to your child to the non-public school until an agreement is reached or a decision on that hearing has been reached. So it's almost similar to stay put. It's kind of similar to stay put, where you're going to stay, where even if the school district declares it impractical, they still will have to figure it out during that time. And that can actually be really helpful when you're going through an appeal process, because the school district will be providing that transportation anyways. And hopefully you can figure out a way to say, hey, you guys have been doing it for so long anyways, just keep doing it. It seems like it's not impractical. What I do also want to point out is that if the appeal is successful, if the appeal is successful and the hearing officer at the end of an appeal says, yes, school district, you have to provide transportation to this child, then the district has to continue to provide transportation services pretty much for the rest of the time that that child goes to that school, unless there's a significant change in circumstances. Essentially, it's a binding decision. They can't just go back and, you go through this whole hearing and they say, okay, it's practical this year, and then next year they go and declare it impractical. No, it'll be a binding decision. But that also works the other way around too. So if you do go through this process, you decide to say, I'm going to reject this payment in lieu, and go through the mediation procedures and perhaps an appeal hearing with the Department of Education. If the decision is that the transportation is impractical, then that decision is binding, not just on your child, but on other families that may have children that attend that school as well. And again, for future school years until there's a significant change in circumstances. So just something to be aware of. And then what I will say is that since there are a lot of questions on this, I don't know what it's, maybe Mark could drop a link, or Mark or Danielle could drop a link in the chat. But I did write a blog article for our blog a couple months or weeks ago, a little while ago, within the past couple months, all about what happens or what you can do and some strategies for success when you have these kind of issues, when the district declares transportation impractical, some more tips and tricks for how you can, be successful in your appeal. And so hopefully Mark can drop that. I saw him nod his head, so that'll be in there eventually. And then kind of another question that we get stemming off of that is for parents, again, when that transportation gets declared impractical, and perhaps parents who utilize scholarship programs like the John Peterson Scholarship or the Autism Scholarship, we then get the question, well, if the school won't, I only got so much payment in lieu, it's not really enough to cover transportation for a whole school year. Can I use the scholarship money to provide private transportation services? The answer is yes, but only, again, if the child has transportation listed as a related service on their IEP. If they don't have that as a related service, then it's not required for their FAPE, and it's not something that either of those scholarships would reimburse for. But it's our understanding that if it's as listed as a related service, then yes, you can utilize that scholarship money for it. And then I kind of wanted another slide here just to kind of gather all of the different complaint options that we talked about through this presentation. So where can I file a formal complaint for issues with transportation services? So if you have transportation as a related service concern, so concerns related to issues with qualification for transportation services or implementation of the accommodations or modifications on the student's IEP, that would be an Ohio Department of Education, Special Education State complaint. It could also be a due process complaint as well, but I would recommend probably a state complaint first before the due process complaint, or it depends on the situation. Transportation concerns in general, which would be issues with just transportation compliance, really limited to that statutory requirement that I talked about earlier about schools being required to pick a student up within 30 minutes after school ending, and not being able to drop them off more than 30 minutes late to school. If you have concerns with that specific compliance, like more of the just what they're supposed to do for everybody, that would be specific to the Department of Education transportation. They have a transportation concern form that you can fill out for the Department of Education, and for this one, what you can do, again, go to the Department of Education website, and then under topics, you can click transportation. And for that first one that I talked about, the special education state complaint, again, go to the Department of Education, and under topics, you would click special education and go through that complaint route. And then finally, I also touched on the US Department of Education Office for Civil Rights, and that's more related to equal access to transportation concerns. So if there's issues with inequitable transportation services, let's say, again, all the kids get to go on the field trip, but your child doesn't. All the kids are getting home from school within 30 minutes, but your kid is getting home within 2 hours. That equal access to transportation concerns would fall more under the Section 504 and non-discrimination, which would be for the US Department of Education and their Office for Civil Rights. And also anything with a Section 504 plan, if you have a Section 504 plan with bus modifications, accommodations, again, like we talked about, a student with Section 504 plan just perhaps has a wheelchair lift on that. If there's any issues with the school, they're refusing to implement that, or maybe they refuse to write that down as an accommodation that your child needs on their Section 504 plan when they clearly need it, you can file a complaint with OCR. Okay, and so I went through a lot of questions. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more from the Q&A, so let me have it. What did I miss?
Okay, I was gonna have you clarify something. So
Mhm.
there was a question about bus suspensions. So if the
Sure.
student is suspended from the bus with transportation as a related service, should the parent transport? Yes or no, since it's considered a school suspension?
Okay, yes, I misspoke on that. I apologize. So for if the student is only suspended from the bus and is not suspended from school, absolutely still, if you can bring them to school, bring them to school. If your child has transportation as a related services on their IEP and they are suspended from the bus, essentially when the school district and the IEP team decides that transportation as a related service is necessary for a student to access their services, they're saying that this child will not be able to get the services on their IEP without that specialized transportation bringing them to school. So if the bus suspends them, they're saying that it's essentially denying the child the opportunity to get access to their services. So if you aren't able, let's say, if you're not able to get your child to school during those 10 days, then it would be considered, for purposes of a manifestation determination review, it would be considered a full school suspension because they were denied access to their services and had that change of placement for 10 days because they didn't have the ability to get to their placement to receive their services. So yes, absolutely. If you can bring them to school during a school suspension, definitely still bring them if you can, but the guidance that I've read is that you still, if it's over 10 days of suspension from the bus, you still can initiate an MDR for a change of placement. Or initiate an MDR saying that it has been a change, that they are trying to change the placement of the child for more than 10 days. And try to connect it to a manifestation, being a manifestation of their disability. And usually it's a manifestation of their disability if it's part of their transportation as related service. And the school district will have to find some other way to get them to school or find some other transportation to get them to where they need to be.
Okay, and then this one is about extended school year services. So if the student, let's see, if the team decides the student requires extended school year services, is the district required to provide transportation services?
That's a really good question. If it's checked yes on their IEP, yes. If transportation as related services checked yes on the IEP, I would say yes. Otherwise, the team has decided that the child doesn't require specialized transportation to access their services, and ESY would still be considered one of those services. So I would think that they wouldn't be entitled to transportation if it's not
I think that's right too. Yeah.
They wouldn't be if it's not checked as a related service, and it would be parents' responsibility. Or if the school district allows school districts, hopefully have some summer school busing.
Those are all the open ones that we had. So if anybody has any additional questions.
I have a correction. I actually answered a question wrong, and then I looked it up just to be sure, and I was wrong. So I want to make sure I clarify this one. And I'm kind of surprised because the question was, so districts can declare these instances impractical, even if transportation is listed as a related service. And I answered, no, that typically applies to students who don't have the box checked. So they can declare students who don't have the box checked. And the reason I answered that way is because in my experience, one of the ways we have navigated these declarations of impracticability with school districts is to try to, you know, if they declare impractical, you have a whole process we mentioned. But one of the things we could do is try to get that box checked through an IEP team meeting so that the student will be provided transportation. And we've had, you know, at least it's been in my understanding that if we could get it checked, we can't always get it checked, but if we can, we would get transportation. But I'm just looking at guidance from ODE's website, and it says that a district still can declare a student impractical to transport if the student has transportation listed as a related service on the IEP. So it says they still can determine that student impractical. So I just wanted to clarify that. I'm going to drop it in the question and answer box too. So it's clear there.
Thank you for clarifying that. And I think I had mentioned it too, because I was surprised. I think you're looking at the same place I was on the Department of Education website. But I was surprised by that as well, because I figured, again, yeah, it's checked on their IEP, they have to provide it, but the Ohio Department of Education on their website says, nope, they still can declare it impractical, which is definitely news to me, and sounds like you too. So
yeah, even with opposing counsel, it seems like they were always under the understanding that if we could get it checked, that we could get the service. But that's what it says. Now, I would think if you had to go to a hearing in that regard, and go through the factors as to why the student needs the transportation, is it specifically as a related service, you got a pretty strong bet to get through that hearing and maybe get a favorable outcome just because it's related to the student's disability. But I guess technically they can declare it impractical.
Yeah, I think you're right on that, as they probably just can under the law, but hopefully it's more successful, or it's easier to persuade a hearing officer that the child needs or qualifies for that transportation. And hopefully, kind of like what I talked about in those 6 statutory factors, I wonder if it could be helpful, again, that if they're focusing on the cost of providing transportation as one of the reasons that they're declining transportation, well, again, if they're doing that because of the child's disability, then showing that they're applying it in a discriminatory manner, I think could be really, successful to a hearing officer.
Agreed.
And then there's a question about extracurriculars and transportation.
Yes.
So what can you say on that? Yeah, what can you say on that topic, Renee?
Oh yeah. So I will scroll back up here. Yep. So the school district under the IDEA is required to take steps for children with disabilities to be able to equally participate in extracurricular services and activities. So if other children are being transported to the extracurricular activity that are non-disabled, then your child should be as well. And if they're not, for whatever reason, then that is likely a section. Well, I was going to say that actually could be an Ohio Department of Education claim, because it's one of the provisions of the IDEA is to make sure that they can be afforded an opportunity to participate in extracurriculars. So that could be a state complaint if they're denied. But if other students, let's say, are not being transported to extracurricular services, then that wouldn't entitle your child to transportation to those services, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, question about if tutoring is required as a part of a REMP, but the school is only offering it before or after school, would they be required to provide transportation? Sounds like it's a REMP, not an IEP. I would say no, because it's not special education.
Yeah, I would also say no.
And I'm answering the next question, but it says, in this situation, the box is not checked on the IEP, it's not a related service. Can the family still mediate if the school says it's impractical? Yes, so
Yes.
the schools, at any point, if the school for any student says that transportation in which it had been providing is impractical, moving forward, they're going to provide a payment in lieu of transportation. You have this, it kicks in this procedure, the statutory procedure, which you can first request mediation. And then if mediation is not successful, you can request a hearing in front of a hearing officer. So those due process rights are available kind of regardless of status of the student with a disability or fully abled. And so in that case, yeah, and if the determination is made, because the determination is made by the Board of Education, if that determination or resolution is adopted and it applies to your student, then absolutely you have the due process rights associated with that impracticability determination.
And that was an
Thank-
autism scholarship question, Mark. I don't know if that made a difference in your answer.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, again, the scholarship doesn't, so long as you're, again, within you have a right to transportation, assuming you're using the scholarship to attend a private school, then you have the right to transportation so long as you're within 30 minutes of the school, assigned school. And so long as the school district provides transportation to same age peers.
Yes.
And in line with that 30 minutes, Renee, someone wants to know if a parent can request someone who's not in the district to determine the time it takes to get to the non-public school if there's an argument over that 30-minute time frame.
Oh, interesting.
I know the answer to that one.
Wow.
It's from the assigned, you go right from the assigned school district, or I'm sorry, right from the assigned school. So if it's an elementary school in the district to the private school, and that's where you're marking the time, and you do it as a bus would drive. So I don't know, there might be occasions where a bus can't get down certain roads or, but it's as the bus would drive, is it within 30 minutes? I think I answered the question.
And couldn't you just use Google Maps? Don't a lot of people just use,
Yeah.
right? So it's like a impartial third party, if you will.
Yeah, it's usually, we usually do it based on Google Maps, and that's what I think if you took it to a hearing officer at the end of the day, that's what they would probably, what would probably be most, I'm not losing my word, but most compelling to them, most convincing to them. Persuasive, that's the word.
Yeah. And if, one last question, then we're gonna have to jump off for the individual guidance sessions, but it says, so if it's already deemed practical, so if they're providing transportation, I guess in that regard, it's deemed practical.
Okay.
So if it's already deemed practical to provide transportation to a non-public school within a district, the district is required to provide transportation for all students attending that non-public from the school district. So there's one more part of this question, but the answer is yes, so long as they're providing transportation to the same age peers. And the reason I say that is because school districts are only obligated to transport kindergarten through 8th grade. But a lot of them do it for high school too. So if you're in high school and the school district doesn't provide transportation for its high school students, then it's not obligated to take you to your private high school. However, most school districts provide transportation for their students. So yes, they would be obligated to take you so long as it's within 30 minutes. And then secondly, it says, and to all that's checked yes on the IEP. Yes, so long as, and especially if it's checked yes on the IEP, then you have, transportation as a right. Can they still deem it impractical? And then you have to go through that process. The answer is yes to that too. But as long as it's practical, then the district is obligated to transport you to your private school within those parameters. So, yeah. All right, that takes us right to 1 o'clock. If there are any questions, you're welcome to shoot an email. All three of us, me, Renee, and Danielle have the same ending or server to our email addresses. So it's at educationrights.com. I'll just drop that in there. So Danielle at, Mark at, or Renee at educationrights.com. You're welcome to send us an email. And if you haven't already, you can use the link in the chat box, which is the legal clinic link, to sign up for next month's webinar, and that's Charting the Life course. And we'll have a guest from the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce. So that's transition planning, Charting the Life course on Monday, October 21st, 2024. You can sign up for that or any of the workshops upcoming through the link at the top of the chat box, lawyersforstudents.com/legal clinic. And thank you very much, Renee and Danielle. And for anyone who has an individual guidance session, you should have received a separate link for that, and we'll see you privately in those rooms. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you.
Bye.